Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tim Gray. I'm the Executive Director at Environmental Defense, and I'm thrilled to be here with you all tonight for our webinar, Save Our Waterfront. If you're new to Environmental Defense, welcome. Environmental Defense is a leading Canadian advocacy organization that works at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels to safeguard our water, create livable communities, limit Canadians' exposure to toxic chemicals and plastic, and tackle climate change while building a clean economy. And to anyone who has joined us before, welcome back. Your engagement is what makes conversations like this one tonight possible. Environmental Defense has partnered with NoJetsTO to ensure that Toronto's waterfront remains a place for people, parks, wildlife, and much needed housing instead of a giant airport. As we begin, I want to acknowledge that I am joining from the Toronto area, which is a long-standing territory of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee, treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, and home today of many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples from across Turtle Island. We also want to acknowledge that climate impacts and impacts of projects like the one we'll talk about tonight are not felt equally. Many communities, particularly Indigenous, Black, and racialized and low-income communities, are disproportionately affected, while also playing a leading role in advancing solutions. I want to introduce our speakers, and tonight I am joined by Dr. Mili Roy from the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, or CAPE, and Norm de Pasquale, the Program Manager for Environmental Defense, as a program on NoJets, and he's the long-term captain of the NoJetsTO team. Tonight, we will be starting with a look at the history of the NoJetsTO campaign's past work and the impacts of that work. Then we'll pivot to explore the environmental, human health, and safety and socioeconomic risks of the proposed airport expansion. And then finally, we'll pivot to looking at who among our governments is the real decision maker about whether this proposal moves forward. And then we'll take some time to answer questions from the audience and cue you up on the things that you can do next to help engage with this very aggressive and ill-informed proposal. You'll see the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen as well. Feel free to use it at any time to submit questions. Our team is going to monitor them throughout the session, through the conversation, and we'll try to get to as many as possible during the discussion period. We're also going to share resources in the chat and through a follow-up email that will be sent to all the participants here tonight. So you'll be able to get more resources, more information in that follow-up email, as well as a link to this actual presentation that can be shared because we're going to be recording it. So first, I'd like to introduce Norm de Pasquale. He is a Toronto-based advocate. Norm has been fighting for over a decade for the place in Toronto he loves most, our waterfront. Norm started his waterfront protection work through NoJetsTO, where he served as chair, ultimately winning the first efforts to stop jets in 2015. After that victory, Norm served as a founding member of waterfront advocacy groups Waterfront for All and Ontario Place for All. Over to you, Norm.
Thanks, Tim. And as the slide said, we did this before. So just to walk you through a brief history of the island airport and previous battles, in 1983, the city entered into a tripartite agreement for the island airport with Toronto Port Authority and Transport Canada, and they have been managing that airport for the past 43 years. In 2002, Mayor Lastman got council to vote for a bridge to the airport that, was a precursor for jets. And then Mayor Miller got elected on a promise to end that bridge. So he was elected and they repealed that bridge approval. So that was the first victory against jets. In 2013, Porter Airlines CEO Robert Deleuze called for jets, and that's when NoJetsTO was born to oppose that call. And then, we worked over the next 2 years, meeting people from Scarborough through to Mimico, North York, all across Toronto, building a strong coalition of people who would stand up for our waterfront. And in 2015, the federal government opposed jet expansion, and that was victory number 2 against jets at the island airport. Now, in March 2026, Premier Ford stood up one day all of a sudden, calling for jets and threatened to strip our environmental rights and protections via the Special Economic Zone designation. And then in May of this year, the provincial government passed Bill 110, potentially expropriating Toronto Island, Little Norway Park, and no plan for this airport released to the public. Now, if we win this third fight, that'll be the third victory. And Jane Jacobs says that you have to win a battle like this three times. So look forward to winning time number three. Next slide. To rewind just a little bit to our victory in 2015, it was in the middle of an environmental assessment and consultation about, potentially expanding the island airport for jets. And a tweet came in November from the federal transport minister saying that they would not reopen the tripartite agreement for jets. And that was the end. And that shows you the power the federal government has in this, as two of the three signatories in the tripartite agreement. If they say no, this battle is over and we win. Next slide. So in the Bill 110 that I referenced, that was passed by the provincial government, they can potentially expropriate Toronto Island. So the city is kind of frozen in what they can do around the island now, and the province can stand up and take any part of Toronto Island that they want for island airport expansion or whatever else. Next slide. The other piece that is in the potential expropriations is Little Norway Park, possibly for a larger airport terminal to support jets, possibly for a six-lane road like Lakeshore going down to the island airport that city staff said that they would need. And I think the pieces that are probably most at risk at that park are the children's playground. You can see the lion slide on the right there, as well as the baseball diamond. Those are the two pieces that are at the southernmost part of the park, which would be, taken up for a larger terminal, but you could lose part of that park for a wider road as well. The provincial government said Little Norway Park will remain, but they have not said in what form. Next slide. Need I remind you, Premier Ford is a very poor park steward. This is Ontario Place, West Island, which he completely demolished, and it looks like an absolute wasteland. So I'm not really, we don't really want to be leaving Ford with these parks. He's taken away the beaches at Wasaga Beach from the provincial park designation. So he is a poor park steward. Next slide. Jets would also impact waterfront vision by dominating our waterfront. Now, our waterfront is very valuable today. 17 million people visit the central waterfront every year. 1.5 million visit the Toronto Islands. 40,000 jobs have already been created. We've invested billions in the waterfront. It's given us billions back more in ROI. And there are 75,000 housing units planned in the Portlands area, including 15,000 that are at risk in Aquem and Minising. Next slide. Waterfront Toronto back in 2014 put it best. At what point does the island airport stop being an airport in a thriving, revitalized waterfront and become an airport that overwhelms the waterfront? And that's when you add jets, in my opinion. Next slide. So the current plan calls for a 750-meter expansion westward of the runway, as well as 150-meter safety area on the east side of the runway. You can see that the west side of the runway now, abuts Ontario Place. Like, takeoffs and landings will be basically, right next to you as you stand at Trillium Park and you look south. Although when you look south, you won't see anything because there's going to be a jet blast wall there blocking your view to the island. So really, the money that we invested in Ontario Place, I'm just not sure why we did it because there will be absolutely zero serenity at Ontario Place after this runway expands westward. And you can also see that the Western Gap, has closed significantly to the point where it's my opinion that it will be unnavigable. So you won't be able to go from the west waterfront to central and vice versa if this runway expands in the manner that they're planning to do it. Some other things I want to point out from this diagram is runway approach lighting might be necessary, which would continue to jut out further from the runway in both directions. And if you look kind of rightwards, where jets would be taking off as they go eastward, there is the Portlands, which is, the largest urban revitalization project in North America that will be put at risk. Next slide. So The we what a group Waterfront for All uncovered the environmental assessment that the Toronto Port Authority did in 2017 about that the previous jet expansion plan. And from that environmental assessment, we uncovered that the plans were to have a jet take off or land every 2.5 minutes. So that would truly make Lake Ontario into Pearson on the Lake. Next slide. Jets release a blast that goes out to 190 kilometers an hour, which requires a jet blast wall, which will slow down that jet blast to about 50 kilometers an hour, enough still to capsize a large boat if you're on the other side of that runway in the water. The other thing that the jet blast does, it's not just wind, but it's noxious fumes that get deposited into our central waterfront. Next slide. Here's some examples of a jet blast wall and a jet blast barrier. As you can see, the barrier, they're 14 and 19 feet high, and they will block sight lines from the island to Toronto and block sight lines, conversely from Toronto back to the islands. And these jet blast walls and barriers are a complete eyesore on our waterfront. Next slide. So the jet impact in housing, and these graphics are courtesy of Jim Pinu of Waterfront for All, so thank you. This just shows equipment menacing and the the part of these buildings that are above the red. So I'll explain a little more. So jets require a jet safety area. They're larger, less maneuverable. They need more space to climb. And what happens is there's a jet safety area, which is kind of a three-dimensional boundary surrounding an airport that defines the maximum height objects like buildings, cranes, or terrain can be before they become a hazard to aircraft operations. So what could happen are the buildings and equipment menacing could have to lose 10, 20 stories. And when they lose that much height, the affordable housing that's there, and that's 4,500 units that are planned, no longer pencil. And it's possible the entire building no longer pencils in this scenario. Next slide. This came from a city staff report from this week, and it shows that housing in the East Waterfront is at risk, but housing also in the South Etobicoke is at risk from this jet proposal. So things that would have to happen to these buildings, some of the examples would be they might need to lose, 5, 10, 20 stories. The buildings, their windows might have to be forced closed and relied on mechanical ventilation, and plans for balconies would have to be canceled because these things wouldn't be safe for human health if you're on the outside of these buildings and you're in a jet path essentially. So South Etobicoke now is in a jet path with a jet every 2.5 minutes. East Waterfront is in a jet path with a jet every 2.5 minutes. So, people who've bought condos in South Etobicoke who were not in a jet path, well, if this passes through, you will have a jet going over your condo every 2.5 minutes. Next slide. From the environmental assessment, debilitating traffic, 450% worse in some parts near the island airport during rush hour. And I mean, for those who've been down there, traffic is bad enough. I don't think we need to make it 450% worse. And this is where the city staff report suggested that the road that leads into the airport, which if you've been down there, it's like a little tiny kind of cul-de-sac, it would have to get as big as Lakeshore Boulevard West. So imagine a highway running down to the island airport, and to the left is a school, and to the right is a park. This is the wrong place for a highway. Next slide. Also, birds. There are, if you've been down to the waterfront, you know that this is, a huge bird habitat. It's a migratory bird runway. It's a migratory bird nesting zone. And, in the primary hazard area that has been denoted by Transport Canada, we have Tommy Thompson Park right in that primary hazard area. Jets are very incompatible with birds because jet engines suck in. So they suck in birds. And if you've been down to the waterfront, you'll notice that the birds down there are very large. So a jet and very large birds are deeply incompatible. So, some of the things that are in the power of Transport Canada and Nav Canada is they can demand that parks be paved or migratory bird nesting or resting zones be paved. So we could have a paved Tommy Thompson Park out of this proposal. Next slide. The from the environmental assessment again, so the water, so there's going to be an impact to the water flow in the Central Harbor. So when combined sewage overflow outflows into the Central Waterfront, you might have gone down there and noticed the water is quite brown. So currently, it can take about 6 days to clear, one of those sewage outflows. It would take twice the time, so 12 days to clear every combined sewage overflow. And we think the impact will be worse because the current proposal extends the runway further westward, further impacting that western gap where water flows in and out of. So you're going to have a very sort of slow flushing toilet, if you want to think of it that way, which is not good at all. Next slide. Thank you very much. Just wanted to highlight some impacts, give you a little history, and I'll pass it on to the next presenter.
Thanks so much, Norm. That's a great
Thank you.
overview of the some of the key history of this and also some of the key impacts. So we're going to move now to our next speaker. Where are my agenda? Sorry about that. Now we're going to introduce Dr. Mili Roy. Dr. Roy is a practicing physician and surgeon in the Greater Toronto Area. She serves as Ontario Regional Co-Chair of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, or CAPE, an assistant professor at the University of Toronto, Faculty of Medicine, and section editor, board member at the Canadian Journal of Ophthalmology. She is involved in medical research and teaching. Her advocacy work at the intersection of environmental health and human health includes policy work and lobbying at multiple levels of government, educational activities, and media work. With a strong interest in democracy as a lever for climate action and health, she is also a founding co-chair of the Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign, an environmental democracy organization open to all Ontarians. Over to you, Dr. Mili.
Thanks so much, Tim, and hopefully everyone can hear me. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of this discussion today. Next slide, please. And at CAPE, we work in the space of planetary health to protect human health by protecting the planet. Next slide, please. So at CAPE, we have specific concerns regarding the adverse public health impacts of the proposed Billy Bishop Airport expansion. We want to communicate this to all of you who might use what you learned today in your own advocacy. So the pollutants emitted by commercial jets carry significant human health risks, and these are amplified, as we heard in Norm's talk, by Billy Bishop being sited in a densely populated city center and with goals to potentially quintuple passenger volumes to about 10 million visitors per year. Next slide, please. So I just want to start with a brief overview to understand that when we burn any fossil fuel, including jet fuel, this harms human health by two primary pathways. Number one, we have carbon pollution, which creates greenhouse gases, leading to climate change. And then we have a second pathway of air pollution, spewing out a mix of particulate matter and toxic gases. And that second pathway of air pollution is what we will mainly focus on as we speak about Billy Bishop. Next slide, please. I did, however, want to touch on the carbon pollution pathway just to remind us all that the climate change is the single greatest threat to human health of our time. So every time we're burning fossil fuels, we are also contributing to this much larger problem. Next slide, please. And this poster from the Canadian Medical Association tries to show us just some of the many impacts of climate change right across our country, stemming from extreme heat impacts and the mortality, so death and illness arising from this. Heat, of course, also increases the risk of wildfires, for example, with their own set of risks. We also have the risks of extreme weather producing secondary impacts like housing and food insecurity, which again then cause a cascade of other health impacts. And of course, we have the alarming rise in infectious diseases coupled with antibiotic resistance, which are all linked to climate change. So in this backdrop, let's now focus on the air pollution pathway and its links to Billy Bishop. Next slide, please. So, what are the main pollutants in terms of air pollutants that we're concerned with when it comes to jet emissions? So, first up, we're going to look at ultrafine particles or UFPs. Almost all particulate aviation emissions are UFPs, and we're gravely concerned about these because we lack data compared with other particles such as PM 2.5s that we see in air pollution, and therefore we also lack monitoring and regulation. We'll also look at toxic gases in jet emissions, nitrogen and sulfur dioxides, and we'll talk about noise pollution and its health impacts as well. Beyond our scope today, but just mentioning briefly, is that jet emissions also include things such as carbon monoxide, black carbon, VOx or volatile organic compounds, and hydrocarbons. Next slide, please. So, how do commercial jets stack up against the turboprop planes that mainly fly out of Billy Bishop now? Well, the turboprops fly slower and lower than jets. And this means they're actually more fuel efficient, emitting up to 30 to 50% less carbon dioxide per mile flown than in short haul flights compared with jets. And this means that the turboprop planes also pose lower health risks. Next slide. So, what are the health harms of each jet pollutant that I showed you earlier, and how do these health harms occur? Let's dive a little bit into these pathways. Next slide. So, first, let's talk about UFPs, or those ultrafine particles. The health harms occur when we breathe these tiny particles into our bodies. They pass right through the lungs and even sometimes through the gastrointestinal tract to enter the bloodstream, where they have access to the whole body and cause multi-system disease. The smaller the UFP particle, the more toxic and harmful it is. Next slide. So, of course, since they enter through the lungs, we expect to see lung disease, and we know that UFPs are in fact linked with asthma, cough, lung inflammation, and bronchitis. Next slide, please. But they're also linked with serious heart diseases and heart-related death by factors such as heart attacks, heart failure, high blood pressure, and blood clots. Next slide. Not only do these particles go down through our lungs when we breathe in, but they also go up through the nose, and they sort of hitch a ride in the olfactory nerve, the nerve we use for our sense of smell, which links directly to the brain. Next slide. And in the brain, these can enter directly, bypass the protective blood-brain barrier that exists in our bodies, and cause direct tissue damage to the brain. And therefore, UFPs are also linked to dementia, stroke, and Alzheimer's, including fatal Alzheimer's. Next slide, please. Other impacts of UFPs include diabetes and lung cancer. They make their way into the placenta, so they also cause pregnancy risks, such as low birth weight babies, and are likely linked to certain specific birth defects as well. Next slide. Now, if that weren't enough, let's look at the health impacts of the toxic gases in jet emissions. So first up, we'll talk about nitrogen dioxide, NO2. And here we have the strongest possible level of scientific evidence, what we call meta-analysis, that proves that NO2 causes premature death. This occurs by a number of factors, things such as lung disease. It is linked to asthma, chronic obstructive lung disease, and lung inflammation. It is linked to heart attacks, heart failure, narrowing of the arteries, and stroke in terms of heart diseases. Again, as we saw with UFPs, NO2 is linked with lung cancer and diabetes, as well as pregnancy risks. But NO2 is also linked with neurodevelopmental delays. So children born with intellectual disabilities, mental and behavioral disorders, which they carry as a chronic burden throughout life. Next slide, please. And the take-home message with these gases, with NO2, is that although the WHO attempts to set some air quality guidelines, in fact, the accepted knowledge is that there is no safe threshold of exposure. Next slide, please. If we look at the health impacts of sulfur dioxide, we see the risk profile is very similar to NO2, maybe minus the lung cancer and diabetes risks. Next slide, please. And again, the take-home message is that there is no safe threshold of exposure. The more research we do on the human health impacts with these gases, the more we find the human body is vulnerable to lower levels than we ever thought before. Next slide, please. Let's move on to a whole nother type of pollution, which is noise pollution. Aviation noise is identified as the most bothersome of all environmental noise sources. And in fact, the World Health Organization defines aviation noise as a significant health hazard. So let's have a look at how this happens. Next slide, please. We're fortunate to have incredible research. Just recently in 2025, a meta-analysis, again, the strongest level of scientific evidence, showed clear links between aircraft noise and heart diseases. It is also linked to mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. And again, we have meta-analysis level evidence that airplane noise can increase the risk of cognitive impairment by as much as 40%, and especially in children. And in fact, children's health, unfortunately, is specifically affected in other ways by aviation noise. It is also linked with hyperactivity and inattention disorder. And in fact, in Munich, it was shown that when the old Munich airport was closed, high levels of reading comprehension and recognition memory deficits in children actually improved. Whereas at the site of the new airport that opened, children in the surrounding area of the new airport began to demonstrate increased levels of these reading comprehension and memory deficits. So very compelling evidence. Next slide, please. There's also the safety and security risks of having an airport in a dense city center, and I think Norm already touched on a lot of this. The fact that we increase ground risk. So with huge population around the airport, mass casualties, property destruction, and chemical spill risks are higher. Norm talked about airspace intrusion, the fact that tall buildings and the perennial cranes that dot the Toronto skyline are extra risks. The risk of bird strikes is higher in city centers, and as is the impact of a congested airspace, including risks of private aircraft being nearby. And then there are the amplified risks of what is called runway excursion. So aircraft that veer off or overshoot a runway are much more likely to harm public areas, busy roads or properties without the buffer zones that we like to see around an airport. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share some studies, two studies with you that are particularly important and again can help your own advocacy. The first one was done in Europe in 2024 and is the first ever study of health impacts that are specifically due to aviation-derived UFPs. And it showed, in fact, that more than 1 in 10 Europeans are being exposed to UFPs from aviation, and that this exposure may be linked to over 250,000 cases of high blood pressure, about 330,000 cases of diabetes, and nearly 20,000 cases of dementia right across Europe. Next slide. So we gained some real insights from this research. How far do we need to be living from an airport to be subject to those risks? Next slide, please. So the dark blue bars here from the research showed that with the metric study, dementia, diabetes, high blood pressure, the greatest risk occurs for people who live within 5 kilometers of the airport. And in fact, diabetes and dementia risks are 20% higher than baseline. Next slide. And here I show that in the pale blue bars, that even at 20 kilometers away from airports, there are still much higher than baseline risks. Next slide. So I wanted to apply the numbers from this research to our own airports in the GTA, and I welcome anyone who wants to correct my population figures here. I did the best I could, but it appears, my estimate is that we have about up to 150,000 people who live within 5 kilometers of Pearson. But that number for Billy Bishop is almost tripled. About 450,000 people live within 5K of Billy Bishop. And if we look at the closest residential areas, there's a buffer of maybe about 2 to 3 kilometers around Pearson before we hit the closest neighborhoods. But at Billy Bishop, in the Bathurst Key neighborhood, and I know people are on the call, I saw you in the chat, the closest residential is only 200 meters away from the runways. And overall, it's estimated that maybe about 7 million people live within 20 kilometers of Pearson and or Billy Bishop within that risk area for health impacts. And as Norm already pointed out, there's a plan to densify population in Portland's, and that falls within the highest risk 5 kilometer radius of Billy Bishop. So we need to consider all of this. Next slide, please. We have another great study that was done that looks specifically at death rates in Toronto and Montreal due to UFPs alone. And almost 1.6 million people were studied, and the authors found about 1,100 deaths in Toronto and Montreal specifically due to UFPs. And they occurred from heart and lung disease, strokes, and lung cancer in particular. And what we see is that the higher the concentrations of these particles and the smaller the size of the particles, the more risk we face. Next slide, please. And some of the research for that study was done in a fantastic campus community partnership and looking at levels in Bathurst Key neighborhood. And I've shown some of the photos here of the monitoring sites. And this study clearly showed that the emissions produced by Billy Bishop activities are increasing air pollution in the Bathurst Key neighborhood, and that in fact Billy Bishop is the largest source of UFPs in all of Toronto. Next slide, please. And on days when the wind is blowing from the airport during its operating hours into this neighborhood, the UFP levels can spike to double or triple of the baseline levels and can sometimes exceed 100,000 particles per cubic centimeter. What does that mean? Next slide, please. From the best scientific benchmarks that we have right now, anything over 20,000 particles is considered unacceptably high. So we're reaching more than 5 times those limits in Bathurst Key neighborhood. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, if we truly want to look at evidence-based recommendations to modernize Billy Bishop as airport, as we're hearing is the rationale from the provincial government, first off, we must have rigorous UFP monitoring with multiple stakeholders: the airport, the communities nearby, Toronto Public Health and City of Toronto, Health Canada, so we have federal input, and researchers. We want to look at other ways to reduce emissions, so reduce traffic and idling of vehicles and aircraft. And although we cannot achieve this through one airport, I wanted to mention to listeners that 100% hydrotreated jet fuel is an option that could reduce UFPs and health harms by 70% at a cost of under 5 cents per liter of jet fuel, something that we have not seen the uptake of in the aviation sector and could hold a lot of potential. And finally, let's look at other jurisdictions who are actually trying to reduce air traffic and pollutants while, we have a plan to try to quintuple. France and Austria have both terminated short-haul flights where high-speed rail options exist. So we need to work towards finding these other low-carbon options, making them available to reduce air traffic. Next slide, please. And we also want to support Billy Bishop's own innovation in wanting to be an early adopter of electric aircraft. They actually purchased Canada's first what's called a Beta Minicube charger, and they've done a demo flight of the Beta electric aircraft over Toronto's waterfront, a true vision of innovation and modernization. Next slide, please. So thank you for your time, and really looking forward to the conversation that follows. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Roy. Some really powerful information there around what we can expect if this proposal was to move forward, both in terms of human health and quality of life. So I think it's really important information for people to be aware of as we move forward. Next slide, please. So I'm going to dive in a little bit to trying to clarify in the mess of information that is out there, who the real decision makers are about whether this proposal to massively increase the size of this airport and introduce jets, whether it can actually move ahead. Next slide, please. If you look at the media, and social media in particular, there's a lot of confusion out there. And I think what it seems like on a first glance is that somehow Premier Ford has announced that he's going to build this new airport that's going to have 4 or 5 times as many passengers and jets. And there's nothing that any of us can do about it. And he's passed legislation, and we should all just go back to scrolling and ignore it because he's already made up his mind. Fortunately, the reality is quite different. Next slide, please. And in fact, other people are very involved in the decision about whether or not this proposal ever gets off the ground, pun intended. Next slide. So let's start with who owns the airport. Next slide. Is it the City of Toronto? No. The City of Toronto has lost its ownership portion. It's been stripped away by the provincial government with recent legislation. And now, of course, also faces the loss of control of the Toronto Islands and mainland parkland, as Norm described. So the city government now, in terms of ownership and decision-making authority, has been removed from the conversation. So the power that the city still has is its voice. We have a mayor, we have council, they can speak out, and there may be opportunities procedurally or legally if this proposal does move forward. And we can talk a bit about more of that later. But in terms of ownership or direct control or advancing this proposal, the city is not part of the conversation. Next slide, please. Provincial government. Well, despite all of the bombast coming from the Premier and the fact that the Toronto Islands and the mainland parks can be seized and they could be destroyed by the provincial government, the actual capacity of the provincial government to advance this proposal is absolutely zero. They do not own the airport, and they have no ability to advance a proposal for developing it. Next slide, please. So who actually is in the driver's seat? It is the federal government and your federal MP. The Toronto Island Airport is owned by the Toronto Port Authority. This is a federal agency with a board appointed by the federal government. Any expansion proposal or replacement of the airport, because that's essentially what we're looking at here, will come from the Toronto Port Authority as the owner of that property. In the same way that you or I could not come forward with a development proposal for your neighbor's property, the provincial government cannot advance a development proposal for land it does not own. This is the federal government's responsibility. And the Toronto Port Authority operations can be directed by the federal Minister of Transportation. And Norm very aptly illustrated how that was done about 11 years ago, where the entire proposal for doing this the first time was ended by a tweet from the Transportation Minister. Next slide, please. There's something called the tripartite agreement. This is the agreement that has been signed between the federal government, the City of Toronto, which has now been replaced by the province of Ontario, and the Toronto Port Authority. It currently prohibits commercial jets at the island airport, and all parties need to agree if it's going to be changed. So the federal government then controls both the Toronto Port Authority and, of course, it controls itself. So this agreement cannot be changed without the federal government initiating changes. Next slide, please. If the Toronto Port Authority was allowed to or instructed to bring forward an expansion proposal, which it currently has not yet done, but if it did, all decision-making around the approval of that, the review and approval of that proposal would be under the auspices of federal law. The Impact Assessment Act, the Fisheries Act, the Species at Risk Act, the Aeronautics Act and Canadian Aviation Regulations, and the Navigable Waters Act. All of these things would require review and permitting. All of them federal responsibility with final decisions being made by cabinet. So in conclusion, I want to make this crystal clear. The decision maker about advancing this proposal, the decision maker about reviewing this proposal, the decision maker about whether or not permits are issued to allow it to move ahead is entirely the responsibility for the federal government. Therefore, all of our attention needs to be focused there. Next slide, please. So, who do we need to talk to? your MP. Now, Toronto is blessed with 23 federal MPs, all of which but one are members of the current federal government, all members of the Liberal Party. All of them are all of you on here tonight are, or maybe not everyone, maybe there's some people here that are not in Toronto, hopefully quite a few, but anyone who lives in Toronto, their MP is one of these individuals, and they need to hear from you very clearly and loudly that this proposal needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. The messages you may have been receiving via email or text, or you've seen in the media from MPs speaking in a manner that makes it look like they're a passive receiver of some future proposal, those are in fact not true. The federal government has total authority to stop this project today. And any positioning or communication that makes it look like they have no role in that, and that somehow this is going to be brought forward by some independent third party, is disingenuous. And you need to communicate that back to them, both in person, over the phone, and via email. Next slide, please. So we are going to now move to the discussion portion of the evening. We only have about 15 minutes left. We really do want to cover as many questions as we possibly can. Our staff team work in the background here has pulled together some of the questions that people have posted. And I'm going to go through as many of these as I can just before we wrap up the hour. And of course, there's going to be lots of opportunity as well in the future for any clarifying questions to be addressed by members of the panel tonight, but also our staff team as well. So, and I'm going to assign a bunch of these to the folks who presented tonight that are more qualified to answer some of them than I am. First one is, will there be an FOI for the Secret Port Authority development plan? Right now, as far as we know, there is no plan, but some key pieces of it. So I had just read about that in the media today. So we are going to discuss how we pursue getting a hold of whatever is available, because it's been shared. The partial plan has been shared with the province and with civil servants in the federal government, but not with the city. So we do need to see if we can track that down. Why are developers silent in this matter? I don't think all of them have been. I think some of the folks that were involved with the recent letter to MPs from the reality check group, I think some of those folks were involved in the development industry. The next question is a very important one. How can we get liberal MPs to stand up to Prime Minister Carney on this issue? I think the pathway for that is the one that I think everyone has been currently pursuing, and it's really, really important. So there's two things here. One is there's the survey that is being circulated by Transport Canada, and the information that we'll share at the end of this webinar will take you to that and allow you to complete it. But that survey was put together by the federal government, not as a way of commenting on any concrete proposal, because there isn't one, but more of a temperature check. You know, what do the people of this city and the region and the province think about this proposal in general? So responding to that is key, because it's going to help the federal MPs get a temperature check. The other is to reach out to them directly, email on the street. If you see them at the supermarket, if they're the MP in your neighborhood, chat them up, tell them what you think. But the feedback is going to come to them directly. There's a caucus meeting very frequently among both the Toronto MPs, but the Ontario-wide caucus, and then the entire party gets together in Ottawa. And believe me, the more that you talk to them, the more they're going to be talking to the rest of the people and their prime minister about what the implications of this are in terms of the people of Toronto's concerns. So that's the best direct pathway, get those that information across to them. Next question is, has Bill 110 passed? Nora, maybe you want to take that one. That's the provincial Bill 110.
Yeah, sadly, Bill 110 has passed. It got provincial assent, I think, on the last day of the Queen's Park sitting. So it is passed and it is law. Although the province hasn't declared what part of Little Norway Park or Toronto Island they wish to expropriate yet.
Right. And then another one I think here for you as well. It says, what are the specific differences between the old expansion plan, so this is the one from 11 years ago, and the new one? I know we don't have the exact plan, it's more like rumors. But how many new passengers will we come to expect from this expanded airport?
Yeah, so a few quick differences. I mean, the runway expansion last time was going to be 200 meters on either end. I think at some point was 250 on either end. This time we're looking at 900 meters of runway expansion, so taller than the Burj Khalifa. Just extremely large expansion, much, kind of a shocking runway expansion, if you will. And the plan last time was to fly about 5 million passengers, and now we hear that the ultimate goal is 10 million, which is, five times what they're currently flying, which is a staggering number. And I just can't imagine how that area could support it.
Great, thanks. And for Dr. Roy, do we have any recent or current day examples of jets being close to populations and research that points about this? So this would be in addition to the Bathurst Key studies that you mentioned. And so if people looked at this proximity issue in other areas.
Yes, I mean that's sort of what I tried to show with the European study and those figures that I presented. That would probably be the largest study to date that really tried to quantify, what are the risks, what percentage do health risks increase, and also so importantly, what is the radius, so that 5 to 20 kilometer radius, really came out of that study.
Great, thanks a lot. Another one here related to health risk is the health impact data for Billy Bishop for the existing situation or projections of what the data would be if the expansion goes forward?
The study that I also quoted that was done in Toronto and Montreal, those are the actual current day, sort of figures. So those are from on the ground measurements. Those are not just projections.
Right. So that's the current problem that you were mentioning. Some of the mitigation measures that need to be taken to try to address the existing problem, never mind adding a lot more jets to
Yeah.
it.
And the other thing to note is, that there's also the added burden of UFPs and other particulate pollution that's coming, say, off the freeway as well. So that compounds the pollution that's being generated from Billy Bishop.
Great, thanks. And here's a question which I think is related to the planes that would fly there. Maybe Norm can answer this one. Would we still have turboprops, or would they just be replaced by jets? And any thought or numbers about how often the jets would be taking off?
Yeah, from the environmental assessment that we see that they're looking for 24 takeoffs and landings every hour. So that works out to a jet every 2.5 minutes. Now, the jets are going to push out the other planes. So general aviation will likely get pushed out for, the money-making jets that the Port Authority wants to fly. So jets, when I say jets will dominate, they will dominate the waterfront. They will dominate the airport as well.
Great, thanks. So I'm just looking through some of the remaining questions here to make sure we get to the ones that a lot of people have been asking. There's a question here. Is it better to phone MPs at their constituency office or in Ottawa? Norm, maybe you want to take that one.
My gut tells me the constituency office. I think they have local staff that are used to discussing local issues and then feeding those local issues back to their member of parliament, So I would think that the constituency office is your best bet, especially if you want to visit.
Exactly. I would agree with that. I think that especially going forward, the parliament will be rising very soon. And so that's where you're going to be finding your member of parliament is actually in their constituency office over the course of the summer until parliament resumes in the fall. There's another question. Why would they design a new runway to go parallel to the shore instead of from the south so the flight path is directly out over the water? Norm, any ideas?
I can put it like this. So imagine a turtle. So you push its head in and its legs stick out much further in the other direction. It is so complex there. No matter what you do, you are going to run into terrible conflicts. So if you expand westward, you close the Western Gap, you make water stagnant. You wreck Ontario Place. You expand eastward, you severely impact the central waterfront. You let's say you move that south, you might obliterate Hanlon's Point, right? So there's no place you can move where you're not going to find a conflict on this, just this really well-used mixed-use waterfront that we have.
Great, thanks. Another question here with regard to the possibility of launching any legal challenges against this proposal. I think that any concrete proposal coming forward will be reviewed in terms of its legality and its compliance with the required processes for review and approval. But right now, it's a bit of an abstract idea because it's mainly a fantasy in the Premier's mind that he's trying to get the Toronto Port Authority to adopt. But once there is something written down, and if there is, then I think a review of its legal compliance could occur, and it will. I think we've covered most of the questions here. I'm just quickly scanning here. One question, oh, here's another one too. There's been some discussion about the need for the runways, not just to be a lot longer, but also quite a bit wider. Norm, I know in some of the renderings I've seen, it looks like the addition of so much more traffic and jets means that the protrusion into the lake isn't just longer along the existing runway kind of width, but actually needs to be a lot wider. Maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we're talking about much larger planes. They need much more space to turn around into taxiways to get to the runways. So you can expect a much wider runway to accommodate these larger, less maneuverable jets that, even on the ground, it's going to require a wider footprint.
Great. Thanks a lot. Okay, we're going to track towards wrapping up. We did promise people that we would let you run off to patios and drinks by 8 o'clock. I want to very much thank our guests this evening. I think we've really had a chance to dive into the potential implications of any proposal coming forward. We've had a good chance to look at who's the responsible decision maker, where we're at in the process. One of the things that we want to make sure that people are aware of is that we will be sending out materials that allow you to access more information, to take the survey, to connect with your MP, and also to see a recording of this event this evening as well. We really encourage you to read our most recent blog. That's going to be pasted in the chat. I think it already has been. It includes the two actions that I'm mentioning: reaching out to your minister, your member of parliament, the Minister of Transport, who's Stephen McKinnon, and also to take part in this public consultation that's ongoing that has also been put in the chat. Our blog goes over some of the important points in the survey that's being currently conducted and includes some guidance on how to respond to some of the questions that are being asked. So that's all for tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Making sure that people know about this issue is really up to all of you. You need to talk to your friends and your family and your neighbors. Whether or not this proceeds forward and even gets to the proposal stage really is up to all of the people in the city and this region. If we stand up and say we're not going to have this, then we won't have it. But if silence is going to be met with or interpreted as acquiescence, and we have a premier that very much wants to do this, it seems that we have a federal government, at least at a leadership level, that's quite open to pushing this forward on the premier's behalf. And we clearly have an airport terminal owner who would really like to see whether they can turn this into something that would make more money for themselves at the public expense. So it's up to all of us, up to all of you. Thanks for joining us. Take care, and we'll be in touch.